So it's like, hey, you remember when you were on the most critically acclaimed show of all time? Here's the green screen suit you're going to put on. Yeah.
Welcome to the Film Riot Podcast. I'm Ryan Conley, and today on the show we have Vincent Masciale, Luke Barnett, and Tanner Thomason. Yes, 3 filmmakers, all of which are behind the new independent comedy Faith-Based, which has a really great story of how they made this passion project come to life, which really goes hand in hand with the way that I like to think of things and, you know, the stuff Film Riot has preached since it came out. They just were going to make this thing happen no matter what. From starting on, we'll just shoot this with iPhones in a living room to scaling to what it ultimately became, known actors and full-on distribution. So it's an excellent and inspiring story, and we get into all of that, including just how they made the film. So I'm going to shut up now and get into it with the guys. I like to jump into the same part, same place with everyone. And we got all 3 of you here. So I would like to, I'm very curious, all different perspectives of, for each one of you, what was like the inception of your career? Not this story, not necessarily like your first professional but what was it like early on, either in your youth or whenever you found it, that you're like, this is the thing I want to do. Filmmaking, this is my passion.
Boy, that is a good one.
Well, I can tell you from me, it was in high school, I was in a lot of, kind of what a lot of actors were into, which was the plays. And I had a really close friend that was much funnier than I was and 2 years older than me. And he kind of like really pushed us into doing kind of sketch comedy stuff, which was not something that ever was happening at my tiny Christian school ever.
Right.
And so that guy, I was a freshman in high school when I was friends with him, and he definitely kind of like made me want to do that sort of thing specifically. And it was probably by senior year of high school, between that and the plays, that I didn't exactly know what I wanted to do in the movies and TV world, but I definitely at that point kind of knew, I'm going to end up in Los Angeles, and I'm going to end up taking a crack at getting into the world of acting and writing and stuff like that. Yeah. What about you, Tanner?
Oh man, it's funny. My story's not that different than Luke's. The town I'm from a 4-stoplight town, and I sort of got miraculously lucky. When I got into high school, we had a teacher, Stephen Smallwood, and he ran the drama department. And so, high school is the first time you could like pick your classes, right? And so I had to fill out another elective, and I was like, sure, I'll take this speech class. And it wound up doing like the skits and the plays and the musicals, and then from there did that at college for a little while. Dropped out of a drama department in college. I was studying drama, then I dropped out of that and moved to LA. So it's like pretty similar story.
I will say it's crazy what a high school, my wife is a junior high teacher, and it's crazy when I think about at the time, you don't necessarily think about some sort of high school teacher or somebody who directed the high school play or something having a legit impact on where you actually end up in life, but right. It's crazy. I'm sure every single person you could talk to has some story, if not multiple, of a teacher or somebody like that when they were very young, actually having an influence. And I can remember this one teacher, the first real, somewhat big part I got cast in high school was playing this character, Dr. Einstein, in Arsenic and Old Lace, which was like a play most high schools do. And it was just like this kind of funny, in the play, he's like this funny supporting character. And I'll never forget, just like every time I would say one of his lines, you could hear the whole audience laughing. And that was definitely like a foray into like, oh, this is a drug, you know? And it's like, that's 100% into this one teacher who basically talked me out of auditioning for kind of the lead straight man and playing this kind of weird character.
Totally. That instant feedback. That was kind of, it wasn't high school for me. It was youth group. And just being able to be on stage or do the videos they let me do, just that instant hit of like laughter or whatever it was like, oh, more. What about you, Vince? It was similar, different?
Yeah, kind of similar. My dad was into technology when I was super young. And so he actually had a Betamax player before, during the beta VHS wars in the 80s. And I specifically remember having a beta tape of the movie Monster Squad that my sister and I just wore out to death. I loved Monster Squad. so much. And then when we transitioned to VHS, it became Back to the Future and Indiana Jones and Ghostbusters. And so I grew up watching those movies, not really realizing somebody actually had to make those movies. And it wasn't until, oddly enough, I think it was like a combination of the movie and my age, but about 9 or 10, I went to the movies to see Terminator 2 with my cousin, who I was really close friends with.
Excellent
And
10-year-old movie.
Terminator 2, it still is an amazing movie. It still holds up. But when I was 9 or 10 and I saw that movie, it blew my mind in so many different ways. And like, you know, if you remember back then, Arnold Schwarzenegger was a bad guy in the first Terminator. And when he comes on screen and you realize when he says, "Come with me if you want to live," to Sarah Connor, it's like, wait a minute, he's a good guy. That was a twist. And it blew my mind as a kid. And for some reason, I walked out of that movie realizing somebody made that movie. That's what I want to do with my life. And then, transition to high school. I was super lucky. My high school had a film program, which was crazy. We had a big TV studio. And so I spent 4 years, every extra hour in high school in that studio, making really bad short films. But yeah, like Luke said, I was hugely inspired by my high school teacher, Chuck Schubert, who just like gave me access to every piece of gear that I couldn't afford and let me just kind of run wild with it. So
that's awesome, man. Yeah. And I have a similar thing with you where for me, it was Jurassic Park a year later, but Terminator 2 was a big one for me too, except my parents were way more strict. You know, I come from more of a religious family and all that. So like this film really like clicked with me in so many ways.
Jurassic Park was definitely my first time of having watching something and realizing someone has created a world that we cannot check out anymore. That was definitely my first feeling of like, whoa, somebody's made something that you can't just like go find in the real world. And that's incredible.
Yeah. I 100% agree. I was like 11 years old in a theater being like, where am I even? Like this window to something else.
It's so interesting, that idea of like, because there is that transitional period where it's like movies that you watch when you're young and you're just like, what an amazing story. And then eventually you learn like, oh, wait, someone put that together.
Yeah.
Like I distinctly, it's funny because it is the poster behind you, Ryan, but like I distinctly remember watching Jaws. And then the movies, you know, they're paddling back towards the beach, and then the credits start to roll, and like Steven Spielberg's name comes up there. And I asked my parents, I'm like, who is Steven Spielberg? And they were like, oh, well, he made that movie. And that was literally the point in time in which I was like, wait, hold on, people do this. You know?
Yeah, who's the Steve guy for? He is now my God.
Yeah.
You know, it's pretty amazing that the 80s and early 90s, I feel like, was such a special time for like those magical moments.
Yeah.
You know, whether it's in front of your TV or in a movie theater, watching those experiences, they weren't popping out every single week. It was a very special experience, and they were larger than life. And it was the first time, you know, the blockbuster kind of came into our world, and obviously it influenced all of us, but you know, I miss those special moments where it's like, this is the movie, we all have to go see it.
Yes.
And it changed, you know, it was special for everybody.
It's got to be super weird now to like to grow up in a world where just like, you know, every weekend another like huge awesome thing comes out, and it's just kind of like, cool. Yeah, we go on Friday, like the next one comes out. It's like not like, oh, every 6 months something massive hits.
Totally.
You
know? Until a worldwide pandemic hits, and that doesn't happen anymore.
Yeah, exactly. But it's like all streaming now too. It's like everything's just right there whenever you want it, right when you want it. So it's like, do I want to watch it? I'll watch it tomorrow.
Anyone under 30 listening to this podcast just turned it off because they were like, these fucking old guys complaining about their.
Like I remember. Like I just don't think this will ever happen again. Like my little hometown theater used to be just 2 screens. I remember when it went to 4 screens, we lost our minds. But I remember in like 92 or 93. The line for Addams Family wrapped around the building, and like the excitement you get as a child seeing a giant line to go watch a movie. It's just like you don't get that on your couch streaming Netflix.
Totally. Well, also what you don't have now. I grew up. I wouldn't say poor, but like on the lower side, and it wasn't until I was much older that I realized all the movies I was seeing were at the Dollar Theater
Same,
only
yes.
4 months after they'd come out. And it was like, to me, that's just the movie theater that we went to. I had no idea that people had been watching this movie for 4 months. It was just like, oh, we go see Jurassic Park now. Everyone's been talking about it for a year.
I was just talking to somebody else about Dollar Theaters. It's just so hilarious because they all had that very specific off orange yellowish hue to the bulbs that were a little gross, and
it'd
all
been like
the
sitting in the
floors were
sun
sticky.
a little bit too long.
Yeah, it's like, does anybody clean this place? And then you're like,
I have a
"Tell the
memory of my
popcorn,
dad
please."
making a fuss over it and going up to $1.50, and my dad was like, "They're raising the prices at the theater," and it was just like, "Oh,
this is bullshit."
Yeah.
We had a Dollar Theater in our town too, and I distinctly remember one of the it was a double feature Dollar Theater. And they had, when I was younger, speaking of, Ryan, you saying your parents were strict. My parents were pretty cool with movies with me when I was young. But I distinctly remember the double feature was Aladdin and Cliffhanger. And I don't know how you put those two movies together. You've got one animated kids movie and this pretty gritty, action thriller where someone dies at the beginning of the movie. Spoiler alert. And I loved it. It was great.
No, I mean, makes total sense. Sure.
Yeah.
You got the genie and John Lithgow. Why not?
Why not?
So, I mean, I guess I kind of like another question I always ask, because I just think it's really interesting, especially once you see someone's work, to see what was usually there's like a seed, a movie that planted a heavy seed. And it sounds like for you, Vince, it was Terminator 2. Was it Jaws for you, Tanner?
Man, that's interesting. That's such a tricky one. I saw Jaws probably a little too young. But you're talking about like a movie that.
Well, a good way to phrase it is like my example, which is just Jurassic Park. Like anybody who watched the shows just thinks I'm like obsessed with Jurassic Park. Like I watch it every single day. I don't. I love the movie. Mm-hmm. And I think it really is one of the greatest movies, in my opinion, ever made. It changed things, but not all of them are that way. It just lucked out that it was one that holds up. But for me, it was just because I was that 11-year-old sitting in the theater, similar to what Vince said about Terminator 2. And it just, took me to, it was rapturous for me. It took me to another place. I couldn't believe that I felt so unsafe and unsafe. It was the first time where it really clicked for me, like, similar to, what you guys were saying, what Luke said of like, this is somewhere else. Someone made this. Someone took me here. Somebody gave me this gift. And then I was like, I have to do this for an audience.
I have I remember my parents taking me to the theaters for Back to the Future 2.
Yeah.
And I remember like that one for me blew my mind so hard. I mean, I remember that distinctly, and I remember Beetlejuice distinctly. And so it's like that combo right there. I wore both of those movies out.
That's a good combination.
Yeah.
What about you, Luke?
Mine would, I would probably either, I think in the same like month period, I saw Dumb and Dumber at the Dollar Theater, and I saw Monty Python and the Quest for the Holy Grail on VHS. And those were definitely, I don't know which one was first, but those are the first two times I can ever really remember the feeling of watching something and literally laughing until you're just constantly crying and unable to stop. So I'd say either one of those, Dumb and Dumber or Monty Python, was definitely my biggest memory of like, oh man, I've never felt this way before.
Man, Monty Python Search for the Holy Grail is one of the most quotable movies of all time.
Yeah, I mean, Jurassic Park, my wife and I got married in front of dinosaurs at the Natural History Museum. So Jurassic Park's a top 5 of mine for sure.
Kindred spirit.
When I was at OU, I had switched out of drama. I was studying business, and I went to this art history class, and it was the last day before Christmas. And the professor had told us earlier in the week that there would be a pop quiz, and nobody needed to skip this class on Friday. And everyone was just like upset. We were like, what? It's the last day before Christmas break. Everyone's already off campus anyhow. I'll never forget, we were in this class, and it was kind of a hard, like stern teacher. And maybe a third of the class showed up. And so the teacher like walks in, acts like everything's normal. And it's like, all right, guys, well, we're going to take this pop quiz, and we're just going to do it. So go ahead and get out a piece of paper. And everyone's like, oh my gosh, I can't believe blah, blah, blah. So they get out the piece of paper, and the professor goes, what is your favorite color? And then hits us with the questionnaire from the Holy Grail, like the airborne speed of what is it, African swallow? Yeah. And then we turned that in, and that was our bonus points, and they sent us on our way. So
that just deserves some kind of an award. That is a solid teacher right there.
Yeah.
Well, let's jump forward to your film, Faith Based, which I just checked out recently. I really loved it. I was laughing my ass off. And like I said, I do come from, I was raised in church, all that stuff. So there was so much that was like, they have direct, experience of this. Like, this is too on the money. So, Luke, you mentioned that you went to a Christian school. Do all of you have that sort of background, or?
We're all definitely raised in the church. Yeah.
Yeah. And I grew up in Orange County, Southern California. And so I grew up, I wasn't Luke was a pastor's kid, so it's a bit of a different experience.
Oh, PK.
PK. But I grew up, going to youth group and, Bible camps and skiing camps and all that stuff with church and kind of grew up with it. So yeah, we all have different experiences to pull from that are all kind of very similar.
So what was the inception of the film, that initial kernel of the idea? What really kicked off the, I want to write this thing?
I think it was a combo of two things as we've kind of thought back on it. One of them was Vince and I, and Tanner was a producer on the first movie I wrote that Vince directed was this horror comedy Fear Inc. And it was kind of very grassroots, made it ourselves with friends and credit cards and everything else. And it premiered at Tribeca and kind of did some really cool things for us. But I think that we thought, oh man, in a year, we're going to have a TV show on the air and we're going to have a studio movie that we're doing and all these things. And, we'd had various levels of success in terms of pitching, but at the end of the day, we don't have a TV show on the air or a studio movie. And at one point I kind of joked with Vince, we should just make a really bad Christian movie because they all make so much money, cast Kevin Sorbo or Kirk Cameron, and then use that money to make the things that no one's giving us the green light on.
Yeah.
And so we had kind of used that idea as a pitch for actually a TV pitch. So our first go at Faith Based in terms of what that story was essentially a TV pitch. It's a very similar story to what the movie became because it's essentially the first season. We had really loved this first season that we'd outlined, but kind of couldn't get past the first season because it ended really nicely. And we basically eventually turned the first season into the feature script. And I had also had, we've talked about this a few times. I had a few friends in high school that played in very talented bands. I was in bands that were not talented, but we had friends that were actually good, and they never really had success out of high school more than kind of a local lore. And there was a few friends that I did run into years later who were all of a sudden a Christian band. They just changed to a Christian band and they were actually making six figures, playing mega churches and Christian colleges. And there's literally anybody that knows 90s kind of pop culture Christianity. There was Creation Fest, and there was one in Illinois. I forgot the name of it, that it was basically Christian Woodstock.
Yeah.
And they would play these festivals. And that was such a thing back then. And I think that's kind of happened with movies the last 10 or 15 years, where you have so many examples of literally churches raising money, doing a movie that does star a Kirk Cameron or a Kevin Sorbo. The movie comes out, they take busloads of theater goers to see them. And all of a sudden that movie that was shot for hundreds of thousands of dollars, has made between $5 and $30 million.
Yeah.
And that was always something that's interesting, I think, to all three of us.
Yeah. It's that line that's just cracked me up so much. It's why do Christian movies have to be bad? They don't have to be bad. They just don't have to be good. That's kind of feels like an inception in and of itself. So did you was it at a singular thing, Luke, that you came up with this idea and you were writing the thing, or were the three of you together from the beginning of it?
We've definitely all collaborated on figuring out kind of what that story was in terms of the major beats and kind of making sure that we were all on page to be telling a story we all felt excited about and passionate about. And then kind of once we solidified that in terms of what the movie was going to be, then I kind of went into a cave and wrote it probably in, I don't know, a month or so for a first draft. We really moved probably quicker on this than we've ever moved on something. I probably started actually writing the script at the end of 2018. So maybe December of 2018. And I think we had the first table read of it in February of 2019. So pretty quick after. And then we started shooting in May, pretty quick.
real fast.
All last year.
Did that table read shift the script quite a bit? Did you find things that you wanted to adjust?
The table read, I don't think shifted it too much. We're huge proponents of both table reads and screenings of rough cuts, because I think that some people are like against them, because I do agree they can kind of get out of hand with people jumping on bandwagons and all of a sudden saying, oh, well, yeah, I didn't think about that. But now that you've said that, you're right. It does this. And it's hard to kind of differentiate. But at the same time, we do surveys after all of these things that people kind of fill out on a Google Doc. And that is so helpful, because we will have, it goes from very simple questions. The first act, is it slow, good, or fast and stuff? And then you can kind of see, okay, if everybody is feeling like the first act is slow, it's probably slow,
But in terms of, like majorly shaping the story, I think we had a pretty solid idea of what we wanted to do. I think the feedback that we got specifically with the table reads was really refining and making the jokes better and making the characters a little bit more relatable. And that's the type of stuff that, hopefully we're going to do on every project, because you get so focused and in your little bubble when you're developing something that sometimes you don't think about something that maybe a group of people will think is pretty obvious. So that's the stuff that we're like, we'll walk away from table reads and go, man, we didn't even think about that. And it elevates the project so much more.
Yeah, that life breathed into it, even at that level, does kind of bring a lot of stuff to light, makes it a lot more clear. But so the three of you broke the story together. What was that process like? Did you have just a board that you were just throwing up ideas on? Like, what was your process?
So we like to go to this. We have a very special place. It's called Buffalo Wild Wings. And
how C.S. Lewis and what's his name had their like famous pub in Oxford. Ours was like the Sherman Oaks Buffalo Wild Wings.
We just like brainstorm it at each other's houses and via email, and at literally at the Buffalo Wild Wings and at the Springbok Tavern, which is around the corner from my house.
But then, that's where we go to kind of ideate and just like come up with wild ideas. And then once we start getting closer to, okay, we think we know the general direction of the story, we'll typically sit down with a corkboard. I think in this case, it was at Luke's house. And we just start tossing okay, we had this idea here, and we'll literally write it down on an index card, put it up on the board until we have every scene of the movie, and then, move things around and kind of tweak that. And once we're happy with that, Luke will go and write an outline, and then we'll read the outline and we'll make some changes to that. And then we're off to the races, or Luke's off to the races writing the script. And that process, I feel the more we spend up front doing that, it seems like the less time we're spending writing and rewriting the script, because we've kind of already figured out like, all right, this is the story that we want to tell. Not that things don't change, but we're not like scrapping massive chunks of the movie when we do that.
I love that there's like all three of you together doing that, like three brains putting in this thing, because writing can be such a like terribly, miserably lonely desert. It's like, I love collaboration. So I love that it started that way.
Well, I think people also don't do enough, like they don't get enough feedback often on those early stages, even when it's not done like that. Like even other scripts that like I've written where it wasn't quite as collaborative as that, I still will basically send, I'll start with a log line, go to a summary, go to a 2-page summary, go to a treatment, all that stuff. And almost each one of those passes, I will send to Vince, Tanner, a handful of other people to get feedback on, so that by the time I'm actually starting to write the script, it's basically painting by numbers. I have tons of respect. Like I just heard Charlie Kaufman on a podcast, and obviously Charlie Kaufman's a genius, but he talks about how basically he could never do that. He does the exact opposite. He doesn't even know where the story is going to end. And I have no comprehension of how you write like that. Like if there was no world where I could just like fade in, let's see what the fuck happens. It's like no world where that happens.
Yeah, no, I completely agree with you. Like for me, I have to know the beginning and middle and end. And even then I need all the mile markers in between. Like I don't start writing till I have all those. Otherwise I just get so discouraged. And then at like page 15, I'm like, forget it. I'm going to start another one. Clearly this one isn't working.
Well, even with Faith-Based, the original idea was we're not going to write a script. We're going to write an outline and go improv the whole movie. And Luke started writing, and the outline became lines and jokes that we liked. And then that became full scenes. And then all of a sudden we're like, wow, fuck it. Now we've got a whole script.
Well, I think it's like, the great thing about Film Right is like over like, the last decade, you've like helped so many people make their thing, right? And if there was like anybody who's listening to this and they want to make a thing, the thing that we set out to do was make something that we absolutely could do. In the very beginning, we were legitimately thinking like, oh, if we raise $10,000 out of our own pockets or some scrap it together buying Subway lunch budget, Subway for, and we'll shoot it on our phones in our living rooms and we'll just cast our friends and we'll improv these scenes. So we removed every single barrier to getting something made, right? Like, you've got a phone, you've got a living room, you've got a friend. Guess what? You've got everything you need to make a short film. And so that's literally how this started, was like, oh, we've got this outline, we'll shoot it with our phones and we'll shoot it with our friends and that'll be it. And then it just kind of organically exploded beyond our wildest dreams.
That was actually my next question. So that was the perfect segue. It's like you read my mind. Was just, you have the script, you have your friend, like, what was the next process into getting this thing made? So you talked about, and man, I love that. I have another friend that I talked to on the podcast not long ago, which that was the thought process of, here's what we have. We're just making this no matter what. And then it just kept escalating. It was almost just like, a luck favors the prepared in sort of a way, because you guys were the train. You were just doing this either way. And then it just kept growing. Could you talk about that process of how you were able to keep growing it to where you ultimately got it? You have known actors in it. It's a really solid production. It looks beautiful. So could you just talk about how it went from that, we're buying Subway sandwiches, but we're doing this thing, into what it ultimately became?
Well, yeah, to clarify one thing, we did still shoot, like, granted, like, all these things kind of came up in terms of shooting with name cast and actors, and we can talk about that. But like, one of the things we did from the beginning, even when we were going to shoot on phones, that didn't change, and I think like people who probably have listened to this podcast have heard a million times, but it's true, is like, we wrote it very intentionally, knowing what resources we had. So we still, like, Tanner and I's house in the movie is Tanner's house. My parents' house in the movie is my in-laws' house. The bar that we're at the whole movie, Tanner and I both used to work at. Like, all of these things were resources that we could both make a better movie because we're kind of writing in our real lives, and also knew we could get those locations.
That's great, man.
Yeah. And then at the beginning, like we do with every project, we, our first thing, once we've got a script that we're like, all right, we want to shoot this year, we start calling our key crew members that we've worked with in the past. Usually it's our line producer, who we know is like, okay, you're going to sort of put this whole thing together in terms of locations and crew and give us our budget. And then the, next call is our DP. And on this particular project, it was like, we have no money. We're probably going to do this on weekends. Here's the script. Here's the concept. Do you want to come on this ride with us? And everybody that we asked was like, yes, we want to work on this. Yes, we want to work on this. And so talking about exploding, that's kind of the first step of that process. Once we had our script, was like getting those key crew members in place. And, once our line producer started putting the budget together and our DP started saying, well, we can do this on iPhones, but I'd rather shoot it on 2 Red cameras. It becomes, the budget starts getting a little bit bigger.
Yeah.
And then, our friends that like have been in shows and movies start saying, yes, we want to do this. And then you start getting into casting conversations, which that's when the dominoes really start falling in terms of names. But it started small with just asking our friends, do you want to do this? And it just kind of stacked up on top of each other.
How did you end up finally pulling in the budget you did pull in? Is that something that you could talk about?
Yeah, it's a combo of, I think one of the things that we did that like is an incentive to other investors is like almost all of our projects, we've put in our own money. Whether that's through credit cards or through, whatever it is, we've always kind of been able to go to other investors and say, look, we've got skin in the game. Like, even if it's a much smaller amount than we're asking them for, we could be putting in a fraction of what somebody else is going to put in, but they definitely respect the fact that like, that's probably a lot of money for us. You know what I mean? So it's like somebody else putting in $100,000 or something is probably the equivalent of me putting in $5,000 or whatever. But at least that shows them like, oh, these guys aren't just taking my money to get a paycheck and make this happen. They have skin in the game. And so we did that right off the bat, and knowing that if that's what we have to shoot it on, that's what we're going to shoot it for. And then we went to a combination of friends that we knew had like kind of wanted to be a part of our projects and had the resources. And there's executive producers that we've worked with now on 4 movies that are just like very supportive of us. And we've produced things that they wanted to do. And we kind of went back to them and said, would you guys want to be a part of this? And they said yes. So, that's kind of how we still shot on a very shoestring budget in terms of a true micro budget, but it was at least more than the 10 grand that we were going to do with our phones.
How many days did you guys shoot for? And did it end up being a weekends thing, or was it like an actual just full block?
Weekends.
Yeah.
3-day weekends.
Yeah. It ended up being a total of 18 days, which is really aggressive for a feature with the amount of locations and cast. I think at one point we counted, we had over 40 speaking roles in the movie, and we've got a ton of locations. But yeah, so the way it worked was we scheduled 5 3-day weekends in a row at the end of April 2019 through May 2019. We shot on weekends. So we'd do a Friday through Sunday, take the week off, and the rest of the crew would go work on their commercials and all their other projects. And then Friday through Sunday again, Friday through Sunday. And that's how we got a majority of the chunk of the movie done. And then we kind of set aside, knowing that we were like still casting and trying to get some big names on board. We had set aside a couple scenes that we were going to shoot maybe a couple weeks later. And what ended up happening was we shot 3 days, a month after main production, when we shot with Jason and Margaret and David Koechner all kind of lumped into that last extra week. So it ended up being a total of 18 days, which is pretty insane.
Man, that is so badass. Like, just the scrappiness of that to just get it done is super inspiring, and just, it's so badass. Like, did you find, because I've only done shorts, I haven't done a feature yet, but I have done a short where there were like one piece we shot in LA, one piece we shot in Texas. And there was a chunk in between where we weren't shooting. And I found that so useful to see what we have. And, I found some things that I ended up shooting that I wouldn't have otherwise. Did that 5-day space between shooting, did you find a lot of stuff that you wouldn't have otherwise with a straight back-to-back shooting schedule?
Yeah. I mean, it was, we intentionally, we did it for a number of reasons, knowing like we're not going to be able to pay people as well as they should be getting paid. So there's an incentive there to like come and have this be like a student film where they're working on weekends. But we also decided early on that we were going to edit the movie while we were shooting. So we had our editor on set on weekends, gathering all the footage and organizing the dailies and starting to cut rough cuts together. So by the time we'd get to our second weekend, we'd have everything already assembled that we shot the weekend before. So the nice thing about that, from a director's perspective, was we were able to make creative decisions based off of scenes that we had already shot that we knew, like, okay, this is working and maybe this isn't working. So how do we lean into these beats, as we're going? I think one of the things we learned early on, one of the things I learned was how well the dramatic moments were playing. When we're writing a comedy, you have no idea if that stuff's going to end up being melodramatic. And as we were shooting and watching rough cuts, it's like, man, these scenes are playing really well. And the relationship between Luke and Tanner is working well. And so we kind of doubled down on those beats as we got further through production, which, to your point, having that gap in the middle allowed us to have a tiny bit of breathing room. Because our last 3 movies, it's like you shoot 3 weeks in a row and you don't come up for air until you're done. So it was nice to like have some moments to wrestle with what you're doing and then get back to set again.
Especially because we shot this on such a low budget that there was so many roles that we were all doing, like even out, like we had phenomenally talented people doing certain jobs, but we're also not paying them enough money to like ask too much of them. So half the time we'd have like 4 days for like Tanner and I to like go find new wardrobe and like do stuff that just like you wouldn't traditionally do if you had a big budget, but it really worked in the favor of this.
That's great. I love that scrappiness. It's like that lightning in a bottle stuff. I talk about on the show a little bit, is like the smallest productions I have had where it's like that difficult are some of the ones I look back most fondly on and kind of miss that. You know what I mean? There's just like an extra energy to it.
Well, I'll say this. The one thing that we did that I think worked so well and gave that energy, like the vibe on set was so positive, was, all 3 of us came from a background of doing stuff with Funny or Die and like, short form topical comedy. And there's definitely something so fun about doing those videos where there's no money involved really. Everyone's just there to create something hilarious. And that is a very different energy than when you're shooting a thriller for a real budget and all of a sudden there's all this pressure and things on the line. And we went into this shoot knowing that we didn't have a big budget with the mindset of, let's treat every single day like we're making a Funny or Die video. And it's just that now we're making 15 Funny or Die videos in a row. And that like really worked because you could tell the vibe on set was like, no one's there for the money. No one's there because they just like have to be there. Everyone showed up like, oh, I can't wait to be on this set. And that is a different energy.
Yeah, it translated for me, man. Like I was watching, I mentioned to my brother, it just feels like you guys were having a blast making the thing. Like, your connection in the film, just, the way you guys interacted in the film was like, clearly they're very good friends. It's like, it just,
that's real beer.
So well. Yeah. So it just felt like, everything you're saying really feels like it did wind up on screen and was for the benefit of the film.
I think I'm such a big fan. We've all been on sets where it's been a little bit of a downer, right? There's like, it just hasn't been fun, and it's a creative medium. So I think it should be fun in the first place. But like, there are two things. There's like an unintended, perhaps, consequence of like shooting on weekends is like, like Vince was talking about, we had that footage from the week before, right? And so when a new actor would come in, we could show them like, oh, wow, this is what we shot last week. And people respond so positively to that because they can see right there how well this thing looks. And our DP, who's extremely, extremely talented, like, oh, this looks so interesting and so cool. And so that just pumps their mood up just a little bit more. Yeah. And I think when you multiply that by every single person on set being like so excited, I think it shows. After lunch, right? So we'd go to lunch and we'd come back from lunch and you got to set everything back up. Like we would blast Hall & Oates out of like whatever speakers we had. And like, there are clips of like micro dance parties as everybody's setting the lights back up. And because, if you want to make people laugh, you have to find that like that good vibe on set.
I'm gonna need those special features.
Hey, we're making them right now.
We're working on them.
Nice. Vince, for you as a director with that sort of, workflow of having those 3 days and then off, 3 days and off, was that a stress reliever, giving you more time to like, process what you were going to be doing next? Or did that make it more difficult to like come out of it and go back into it?
No, it didn't feel, I definitely was worried that the stop and go nature was going to feel like hard to pull myself back in every single week. But when you're doing 3 days in a row, it's like we got into a groove pretty quickly, and it didn't feel like a challenge at all to jump back in. I mean, this is a story that like we were so excited to work on that we would laugh ourselves crazy in prep. And when we were working on the script, that by the time we got to shooting, it was like the energy never, for me at least, never went away. And the other benefit is like I'm married and I have 2 young kids. And so like I love being a filmmaker and I love being on set. It's like, it's one of the greatest joys for me, but I don't want to sacrifice my family time for my career. And so that really helped, get to make sure that like, I'm going to be home for dinner and I'm here during the week and my mental energy isn't completely zapped because I'm not shooting 35 days in a row. So yeah, man, it was like, I was worried, but it seemed to not be an issue. And I don't know if we do the same exact format on future projects, but yeah, it's just, I think it's, for me, it's all about just being in the zone and being excited about the story you want to tell. And, I create playlists on my phone for every single movie that we do, and I'm constantly listening to them. So like, I don't ever let myself get out of that space because it can be easy. It's being on set can be a drag. It's long hours. It's hard work. You're standing on your feet all day. You're doing lines over and over again. It can be very, very tough physically and mentally. So I just have to keep myself in a place where I'm like excited to do take 7 of the same joke over and over and over again, laughing out loud. I've got an obnoxious laugh. So like, that's one of the things that I want to make sure I'm in the moment and I'm laughing at the jokes. So the rest of the crew is laughing and the actors feel like their jokes are landing. And that translates into the edit bay too, where my editors get annoyed with me sitting behind them because I'm just cackling at the same joke I've heard 15 times.
Vince's laughter is so good that I need someone else on set to make sure that Vince's laughter is not deceiving me into telling me how funny I am.
Yeah. That's the way our editor, Patrick, on this movie would turn around after hearing me laugh at the same joke for the 10th time, would look at me and go, I think we need somebody else to watch this to make sure it's funny because you're still laughing at it.
Well, that kind of leads into a thought that, you just gave me, is just, working in those comedic beats, for you, Luke and Tanner, you guys as performers, and Vince, you as a director, when, you guys wrote the thing, you guys are producing the thing. It's your idea from the get-go. You've been planning all this. You did the table read. Now you're on set and you're on take 5. How do you make sure this thing is still funny? How do you keep that comedic energy alive? Are you improvising a lot? Like, what's your process to dial into that moment? And, because I've done a good amount of horror, and horror to me has always felt very similar to comedy. It's like a different side of the same coin.
They're all about timing.
And you get to those moments where you're like, is this scary or just stupid? So it can be hard to kind of keep that energy there. What's your process for that comedically?
I think one thing that's really important is, in this project specifically, is like we, from the beginning, aside from a handful of scenes, it's like we surrounded ourselves with people who are hilarious and who do bring a new energy in. And it's kind of an ensemble movie where, it's obviously Tanner and I are together in all of it, and we have a great chemistry as friends and can definitely make each other laugh and all that stuff. But at the same time, almost every scene in this movie, kind of a new person comes in, a new group of people or a new person. And there's definitely on set an energy to that where, in a weird way, Tanner and I are kind of the straight men in the movie. Us and Lance are kind of like the straight men, if you were to look at it that way. And then we're just kind of surrounded by somewhat zanier characters. And I think that definitely was like a huge help to us, at least in terms of just like, it's hard not to feel like things are hilarious and fun and you're enjoying it when every other day somebody else is just bringing something genius to the table that you're kind of like, well, that works. You know?
Yeah, that's the trick. Work with people who are funnier than you.
Yeah, more talented, more respected.
Better looking.
Yeah, better looking for sure.
Better looking, absolutely. Easy to find those people. We would also there were also, the beautiful thing, it's not a play, right? So you get to do the same thing over and over. And we did a lot of tweaking, whether that was like performances or like, oh, is it a little funnier if I if I move this word around here? And so, to Luke's credit as a writer, and then also Vince's, we got to play a lot with the script, and I think that's super helpful.
Yeah, we were pretty relentless. Every morning on set, we would sit down with our sides and read through what we were shooting for the day. And sometimes it was just Luke and Tanner. Sometimes we bring in the other actors. And we wouldn't let a scene be what it was until we were all thrilled with it and thought it was like, okay, no, this is the best way to do it. And if it wasn't, it was like, what's a better joke here? What's a tighter way to get to this point? Is this track, again, one of the benefits of doing this on weekends is we were able to track character arcs a little bit better because we have more time to think about it. So we were pretty ruthless with that process. And we took that all the way through until the movie premiered. In the edit bay, our first cut of the movie was well over 2 hours.
Oh, wow.
And which is insane to think that we shot a movie that probably could have been 2 hours in 18 days. And it wasn't a bad 2 hours at all. It was a 2 hour cut that we're like, okay, we don't want this to be a 2 hour movie. So we're going to have to cut and we still had missing scenes. So we're like, we're going to have to cut 30 to 40 minutes out of this movie that we like. And so it's really about going through it over and over again. And like, okay, I love this joke, but is this really moving the story forward?
Yeah.
Nope, pull it out. And we screened the movie multiple times. We did one really big screening at Red Studios in Hollywood with 50 people. And that was, insanely nerve-wracking for me because I was super happy with the movie. And then you sit down in a room on a big screen with 50 people around you, and then you feel the vibe in the room immediately without even checking the survey. You already know, like, that joke didn't land. That moment's too long. We sped by that too quick. And that's really, you do that 5 or 6 times. By the time you're done, if you're good about trying to check your ego at the door and just wanting to make the best thing possible, that's kind of how we evolved to get to a place where we're like, all right, well, that joke's clearly landed in 5 different rooms. So we know like that's got to stay in the movie sort of thing.
Yeah. Just that rewriting and rewriting and rewriting. Did you guys shoot in order at all or was it all out of order?
Pretty out of order.
Yeah, it was kind of
we did have kind of chunks. It kind of worked out well where like, because we were doing these 3-day weekends. One thing that I don't remember if I don't think we thought about this when writing, but like in doing the schedule, it really worked out well that like every weekend, at least 2 of the 3 days were at one location, which like, even though those locations are kind of throughout the movie, you're still in that kind of mindset and that vibe. So we'd be like a weekend at Tanner's house, a weekend at the bar, a weekend at the green screen place. And it at least kind of kept things together when you were working, even though that we weren't in order of the actual script.
Where everyone was forced to wear a green screen suit.
Yeah.
Dude, I will never forget. So Lance Riddick, who like we were so excited about, and he's fantastic, and he's a very respected thespian, very serious actor,
actual professional
actor. Lance
Riddick, because I only know him as that type of actor.
Yeah, so it's like, hey, you remember when you were on the most critically acclaimed show of all time? Here's the green screen suit you're going to put on. Yeah, well, I'll never forget him showing up. He had done a really short day. Like he basically came to set for like maybe 2 hours to do the bit at the end of the movie and the axe throwing thing. So he kind of met us in person and done that. But then his first real day on set was the green screen day. And I'll never forget, I happened to just be walking down the hallway as he was walking into the wardrobe. And so I just stopped for a second and was just kind of like listening. And I could just hear the wardrobe. I could just hear the costumer basically talking about how, here's his green screen suit. She's going to cut a hole in his face. Hearing this whole thing. And then I feel him start to walk out of the room, probably holding the green screen suit. And I just like skedaddled down the hallway to avoid Lance being like, so this is what you have me in.
And then he comes in the jacket.
Yeah.
That was his idea.
It was so good. So you shot all out of order. I mean, it makes total sense, obviously, in the different places, but it flows so well. Did you do a lot of improv? Like that's kind of was my next question is, if it was in order, it's so easy to improv and shift things. Did you do a lot of improv? And if you were, with being so out of order, did you find that complicated or how did you keep track of all that?
Our initial plan was to improv the whole movie, and we didn't end up doing quite as much improv as I think we originally planned, but we rented 2 cameras that we shot our movie on, and we cross covered. Like most people, when they shoot with 2 cameras, will have 2 different focal lengths shooting towards the same direction, which is what a DP loves because they like one shot and they're happy with that shot. Right. And in this case, our DP was not excited when we told him we're going to shoot 2 different directions. So he's got to like the whole scene. And it took a little bit more time to get each of these scenes lit. But the positive there was, I was holding a wireless monitor with both feeds the whole movie, and I could watch the scene play out live. And the amazing thing about that is we do a couple takes where we get the lines as scripted. And then we'd say, okay, let's do a take where you guys have fun. And inevitably, you're going to get reactions and jokes and stuff that weren't in the script that elevate the movie. And so there's definitely aspects that like things that we came up with in the moment, that the actors specifically came up with in the moment that ended up in the movie that makes it quite a bit more organic. But that's how we were able to pull that off was once we had a moment, we were covering both angles. So we knew like, great, we don't have to do any pickups to make sure we get the reaction or the line, or if somebody said something off camera, it was like, it was there. We got it. Cool. Let's move on.
Yeah.
It's very much dependent on the other actors that we're working with. So it's like, the stuff where it's just Tanner and I, once we got what was on the script, we would just improv a ton. Like, it's just kind of like, cool, we got the line that's written. Let's just Tanner and I riff.
We got the line that's written and our performance isn't going to get better. So let's make stuff up.
So let's just make up stupid stuff and waste everyone's time. Yeah. Or like, but there's certain things that are harder. Like, you get a group scene with 6 people. It's kind of hard to like improv that as opposed to 2 people working, or like certain actors like Lance is a theater actor, and so is Jason. And so those are like 2 guys that didn't improv whatsoever. They would do they would obviously do different takes in terms of their actions and how they deliver lines. But Lance and Jason are not the type to improv. They just stick to the word. But then you'll have like David Koechner, who like maybe said the script once, and then just like you let David Koechner do his thing, and it's going to be better than what I wrote,
I want to tell a real quick story about the cross coverage. This is maybe like my favorite story from the film. there's the scene where Luke and Tanner are holding auditions, right?
Yeah.
People haven't seen the movie yet, and so I'm not going to spoil it, but they're holding auditions, and Ryan, I know you've seen it. So that scene was shot in my living room. We've got a camera pointed at Luke and me on the couch, and then we've got another camera pointed at where the actor would land, their mark for their auditions. And so Vince is in the backyard with the rest of the crew. Everything's here in my living room. It's all lit up. And Luke and I, at that point, hold auditions, truly and literally. We did not know who was about to walk into the room and the audition that they were going to perform for us. And this was by design. That's how we wanted Vince came up with the idea to shoot the scene that way, and it organized all of that. So we literally did not know what these people were going to come in and do. Now, there were a couple jokes that we did know, and that we rehearsed those beats, like the big nose joke and that sort of stuff. We did that a couple times. But we had not cast the astronaut for A Prayer in Space yet. And the woman who comes in and auditions to be the astronaut did such a funny job. We thought she was so funny in our made up improv audition scene that she actually booked the role of the astronaut because of that.
Sounds like a full on life imitating art situation.
Yeah.
It was very Inception. This whole movie was like Luke and Tanner in the movie are trying to cast Butch Savage to play God in their movie A Prayer in Space. At the same time, we were trying to cast Butch Savage in real life. So it was just very wait a minute, are we talking about the movie within the movie? Or are we talking about faith-based? Which one are we talking about?
We literally hadn't cast Butch yet.
That is fantastic. So was Jean-Claude Van Damme your first pick for Butch?
It was going to be Jean-Claude Van Damme actually playing Jean-Claude Van Damme. So our initial idea was that the whole time Luke and Tanner are trying to get Jean-Claude Van Damme to be in this movie. And we did want Jean-Claude Van Damme to do it. And then we quickly learned that Jean-Claude Van Damme will do a lot of things if you give him the right amount of money. But if you don't have the right amount of money, you're not going to get Jean-Claude Van Damme. And so then we changed it to be a fictional kind of Rambo type character.
Yeah, which worked great.
Yeah.
So once you wrapped after that, intense, to short shooting schedule, and you go into post, what was your post process like?
Yeah, it was, like I said, we started editing on set because we were big proponents of trying to play the festival circuit leading up to, a potential sale of the movie. Being an independent filmmaker, we feel like film festivals are a great way to gather an audience and to raise the bar of your film. So knowing that the festival deadline, starting with Sundance all the way through, starts end of August, we know we're shooting this end of April, May, and June. We need to move quick to get our cuts in for these festivals. So we had started on set. We wrapped our initial principal photography in at the end of May. And I think we had our first producer's rough cut 2 to 3 weeks after that, because by that point we had cast Jason and Margaret and David, and we knew we were pushing that week a month later. So our goal was let's get a full cut of this movie, figure out what's working, what's not. If we need to do any extra pickups or change any of those scenes to reflect the movie as is, we need to know that. So we got a cut together really quick. We did notes. We got another cut together. We shot those scenes in June, beginning of June, right?
July.
Or was it July? July. And then in August, we were screening the full cut of the movie with rough color correction and sound mix and temp music to a room full of 50 people. So it was pretty quick. Then we start doing our, refining and smaller screenings and stuff. But by November of 2019, we were basically completely done with the movie and submitting to festivals. And we premiered and played it in front of people in January of 2020.
How do you work those screenings? Is it just written surveys, or are they talking directly to you at times? How do you leverage that to be the best?
Well, the big one was just the surveys, because that's 50 people. But the smaller ones, it's we have them do the survey and then do want a talk back of some sort, because those screenings were basically at someone's house and just, between 5 and 15 people. So you can kind of get more direct feedback. And those were also kind of not to say a more trusted group, but when you're only picking 5 to 15 people, you're kind of okay, who's going to give us the feedback we need here right now,
Yeah. What would you think is the main benefit of that in-person bit, instead of maybe just sending everyone a link and then asking for notes?
That's a good question.
Yeah, there was so there are things in the film that there's a scene in the film. It's tricky not to talk about it in terms of spoilers, but there's a scene in the film where basically the relationship between my character and Hoyt's character, right? And so we wanted to get that right. And so in a giant screening room, when you have, a text survey, sure, people can write anything they want to write. But sometimes when you get to those like smaller groups, like Luke was sort of talking about, the people, your most trusted sort of co-creators, you get to have a more in-depth conversation. And so that was a scene in which one of our final screenings, I think there were 2 or 3 people and we did it in Vince's living room. And I felt like it was necessary to have people there who, like, the relationship as it was portrayed on screen is representative of their real life. And so to have that sort of in-depth, like, does this work conversation?
That's great.
Yeah. And that specific, scene and feedback at that screening, you're asking, what's the difference between in person and sending a screener? The initial feedback from one person in the room was, I'm not sure I understand or like this moment. And then having a screening live and a conversation live, we're able to, in that specific case, we were able to arrive at a solution that the whole room was like, yes, you know what? If you take out this line and maybe add this little bit here, that'll solve everybody's problems with that moment. And it was very simple tweaking that we did with that specific scene. But if it was a screener, I think we may have just gotten a few people saying, I'm not sure I quite like that and I don't know why. And in that case, we were able to fix it right there, which was great.
That instant feedback does sound great, because a lot of times too, like, you send that link and you get notes that are like, they overthink it and they sit there dwelling on, why don't I like this? Where sometimes you just want that initial gut instinct reaction. Sure. So I do love that as well. But you finished the film, you're all wrapped up with it. You did the festival thing. But now you have, distribution. The film's going to be coming out soon. How did that come about?
Well, I mean, I think this was like, in terms of Vince and I as producers, this was our 4th or 5th film that we've at some point been a producer on. And so we had, we've probably worked with, or at least been in discussions with, most versions of agents. So it's whether that's the domestic CAA, William Morris, UTAs of the world, or more of like the international sales agents, that work. And we've been through every sort of like, it's super fraudulent, terrible human being companies. And then we've been with like the CAA of the world. And so I think, the process was like, once we had a rough cut and a kind of a teaser trailer, it was to kind of reach out and find a good fit to represent the movie. And it's like, I think that's something that like a lot of first time filmmakers have a tough time with, or they can easily get into a bad situation where a lot of these, especially some of these more international oriented companies, will basically find a way to make it so you never are going to see $1 back on your film. And even if you are owed $1, you'll never get it from them. And by the time you try to get a hold of them, they'll be saying to have your lawyer call, and you as a first time filmmaker don't have a lawyer or can't afford a lawyer. And so, we've learned definitely the hard way a few different times, but that's something that I think a lot of first time filmmakers have a tough time navigating, because it's just people in film school, they teach you how to make a film or how things are supposed to work on set and whatnot. A lot of times you don't necessarily learn the business of filmmaking, which is obviously a big part of it.
Yeah, absolutely. That is definitely something that's not talked about very often. So like, what would you say to someone who maybe they finished their film and they're entering that aspect of it? What's like something maybe to avoid? What's one major piece of advice for that?
Well, it's like, if you have a film that has a reputable cast, and that's unless your movie is so outside the box, no one has ever seen something like it before, you're going to need the cast to at least be somewhat of a reputable cast to get into like a Sundance, Tribeca, South by Southwest world. Like, I think one of the more disheartening things I experienced is, like, I remember Vince and I being at Tribeca with our first film, and CAA rep that movie, and just talking to all these other feature filmmakers and realizing every single feature filmmaker that we talked to at Tribeca, their film was repped by someone like CAA. No one had just gotten on without a box and submitted to Tribeca and gotten in terms of the features. And that was just like, now I'm very, I wouldn't say savvy, but I know that, I understand that. At the time it was like, whoa, you're saying none of you just submitted to Tribeca and got in. Everyone had CAA, Paradigm, somebody kind of essentially call the programmer and say, you have to watch this movie. And that was just like a kind of disheartening, but like, and then we had a good experience at Tribeca, but then we premiered Faith-Based at Santa Barbara, which I would say is kind of the next tier down. And I'm not going to lie, like you don't get the necessary laurels or sales aspect of Tribeca, but for the other aspects of it, I think we can all agree had like a much better time at Santa Barbara. Like it felt much more personal and so much more exciting. And, so it's like, if you don't get a CAA to rep your movie and you don't get into Tribeca, it's like you can have just as great, if not a better experience at the festival that will accept you when you submit it,
Yeah. And I would say to filmmakers that, because we have had some bad experiences with sales companies, I think the tip to any new filmmaker is to do your homework with these companies. And it's very easy to get an IMDb Pro account, which is like $80 a year. And you can look up any sales company or distributor on IMDb Pro, and you can see the movies that they've repped. And so with all of these companies, at some point, we'll do our homework and look at all these movies, and we'll even reach out to filmmakers that had movies repped by companies and ask them, what was your experience working with this company? We did it with Faith-Based. I talked to the director of a movie that we were talking to a certain distributor with, and they'll tell you, a filmmaker will tell you, they will most likely not lie to you and tell you like this is a great company, or they're crooked, or they weren't what we expected, or whatever. And we'll do the same for other filmmakers. I can't tell you how many filmmakers have called or emailed me and said, what was it like working with X company? And if it wasn't a good experience, I will tell them. I'll say, stay away from this company.
Yeah, the amount of we've gotten probably a dozen emails about Spotlight Pictures, who was our international agent, and it's like we almost sued them. And it's like, so when somebody asks me, I want because they've rep bigger movies, and I always want to be like, maybe it'll be different. You guys should just like go for it. They'll get you this. And then I'm just like, I can't do that. Like I showed up at someone's door, pounding on the door because they were supposed to give me a check for that movie. And it's like, that's not how this world should be. So there's no world where I'm going to like promote that,
Yeah. What is the step to get to that place where, your film is repped to get you into, something like Tribeca? Is it just, are you already, do you already have agents at that place and you're just showing them your work, or how could somebody who finished a film, get to that first step, it seems like?
I think when it comes to the big 5 US agencies, CAA, William Morris, UTA, ICM, or Paradigm, in terms of the agencies that represent movies, not just actors or writers, that's kind of the 5. And I think, just to be totally honest, for most first-time filmmakers, it's a real long shot. Like, they're probably not even going to answer the email. I think to get that email answered, you have to either have notable cast that sparks their attention, or some form of connection, even if you bullshit into what that connection is. It's kind of like, I can find, if you show me an agent somewhere, and granted, we all 3 of us have been out here for 15 years, have met a lot of people. We're not like somebody that lives in Ohio is making their first film. So it is a little bit different, but at the same time, I can probably find some sort of, I know this person who knows this person who knows this person. Right. Now will you answer my email? And if you can write a well-worded email that makes someone who reads it says, oh, this is interesting, whether that's the subject of your movie is so interesting, I have to find out more. Or, oh, you knew John who used to know Jimmy at CAA when I was there. And now it's like, there's a way to get in. But I will say, if you have a movie that doesn't have the hook log line that they're so interested in, or doesn't have the name cast they're interested in, or you don't have some sort of connection, it's probably not, CAA is not going to be the one that's the best fit for your movie. Yeah. And to be honest, like we've learned this the hard way on a couple of things. It's like CAA and stuff is not always the best fit for your movie regardless. It's like CAA, while they are the ones that can sell to a big studio and they are the ones that can get you into Sundance, they essentially are taking a lot of movies with very famous people and kind of throwing it on the wall. And if it hits, then great. You just may have won the lottery. But if it doesn't hit, they're moving on real quick. So for a lot of first-time filmmakers, as much as it's exciting to go with CAA, you might be better off finding a smaller agent that is excited for your movie.
Yeah, man. And you know, the film's done, you know, it's coming out really soon. You got 95% on Rotten Tomatoes, which congrats on that. That's pretty insane.
Thank you very much.
Everything that I've seen, people seem to be loving it. I haven't really seen anything negative, you know, just looking at stuff before we chatted. So you got this
Talk
coming
to
out
Fox
soon?
News.
Yeah. Yeah.
The Fox News comments, those are real.
That was the most genius trailer, by the way, that I have ever seen. That was such a smart first teaser. It got me like 10 times more interested. I'm like, come on, where's the full trailer? I gotta see what this thing is. So that was just a genius marketing move. But what's next for you guys? This is coming out. You know, you got this done. What are you all doing next?
Oh boy, that's $1 million question. It's obviously coronavirus has made everything so much more difficult, and I don't know how it is where you are, but here in LA, like we're under pretty serious quarantine.
Yeah.
And so, you know, we're not allowed to have big groups together to work or to have sets and things of that nature. And so we're working on, we've written a script. We're in the 4th draft of the script. Luke and I are writing it. This is going to be another, like, Vince directs it. Luke and I are going to be the leads of this thing. And we've written it to be able to be completed under this quarantine.
Nice.
And it's kind of a road trip comedy with a musical sci-fi component.
And a talking robot.
I'm listening.
About a month into quarantine, we were like, I don't know if we're going to get back to big sets for a while. And I can't just sit and not go make something. So we were like, what ideas do we have? And Luke had this really fun initial idea, but it was like, what ideas do we have that we can, okay, we did faith-based and that ended up being a tiny bit of a bigger thing, but how do we go even more contained in what we can accomplish by being in person and, you know, take the stuff that we thought, you know, expanded the movie in terms of locations and cast and make that bigger and have something that we can go shoot while we're in quarantine. So that's kind of how that came together. And, you know, we're still in the process of working on the script and we're super excited about it, but that's also, like the next thing we want to do.
Yeah, it's also written in a way, and this is another thing I would encourage filmmakers who maybe like see our movie or another independent film and say, how do they get that cast? You know, because I know it's the $1 million question on most times we've talked to somebody is like, how'd you get Jason Alexander? How'd you do this? And I will say one thing that I think we did on this next movie, even more so that people can learn from is when it comes to getting a famous person to be in your movie and you don't have famous person money, it's like the originality and character is very important and their time is very important. And so it's like, if you can find a way to say, hey, here's a character you've not gotten a chance to play, and this is going to be very fun for you, and we only need you for 1 to 3 days, that's going to be much more interesting to them for no money than it is if you're saying, we have no money, can you come out for 45 days and be the lead in our movie?
And play a cop, which you've done 1 million times.
Yeah, which you've done 1 million times. So a lot of it was like, you know, now he's getting more into comedy, but like Lance Riddick at the time is just does so much drama that he wanted to be in a goofy comedy, you know, and he actually wanted to play Nikki Steele at first, which we were super open to. Like he just wanted to do something that he'd never done before. And so with this robot movie, we've kind of really written that intentionally, both for the COVID stuff, but also for actors is, you know, it's Tanner and I on this road trip, but then it's like a Pee-wee's Big Adventure where we're constantly meeting characters at various locations where we can go to somebody and say, hey, do you want to play the most fun character ever? We need you for 1 day. I mean, who knows if this will work? Maybe we'll be on your podcast in a year and we'll be like, no, we didn't get anybody. But at the same time, I feel confident we will.
This is totally an exclusive. We haven't told anyone this yet.
Oh, yeah.
We're going to get famous people. We're going to get famous people.
Film Riot exclusive. You got to put that banner on the thumbnail.
Yeah.
That's awesome, man. I love the scrappiness of what you guys do. I'm so inspired by it. And it's just, you know, it makes me feel lazy. And it makes me want to get out there and make something during quarantine. And I really love what you're saying too about like, this is where we're at. This is, you know, we're not going to be able to do a big set. What can we do right now? Because I've always found that those restrictions that are just placed on you, some of the best stuff comes from that. Like some of the most creative, you know, fun, outlandish, taking a chance on it sort of things come out of that. So I'm so stoked to see what you guys do with this.
Yeah. Well, you can look at your limitations, and people will come up with a million reasons why not to shoot their thing or not to make their little thing. And you can look at your limitations and just come up with a list. So like, oh, I don't have the right camera. I don't have the right, but and this is something we sort of embrace. You need to lean into those limitations. Like let that be the thing that helps define how you make this. We were going to shoot this on phones in our living rooms. And
one thing also we've done with all of these, including the shooting phones in your living room, that I think made a huge difference, aside from putting our own money in, even if that money is microscopic, is we would literally set a date every time and say, we're going to start making this movie. Then no matter if we shoot this on phones for 10 grand or for hundreds of thousands on Reds. And that's always worked, because even if you do shoot it for nothing and you're not happy with how it necessarily turns out, you're going to shoot it if you say you're going to shoot it. It's like most people just go through years and years of talking about how they're going to make their movie. And at a certain point, you just got to say like, no, July 27th, I'm going to start shooting this movie, even if it's me in my living room doing a weird selfie thing, which maybe that's what I should do later. But at one point, you got to just do it.
Yeah. Well, man. And Ryan, to give props to you, man, you said, this makes you feel lazy. It's like what you're doing with your YouTube channel and your podcast is like, dude, when I watch your stuff, I feel lazy because the amount of content you pump out and how good it is, how funny it is. You've got a great sense of humor. I think it's super inspiring to watch that stuff. And I know when you're doing it, you don't necessarily know who you're going to impact. But like I've learned tips from your channel and I've been inspired to create content. And so if you can't go make a movie, there's no reason why you can't put a camera in front of yourself and teach people what you know about something, and who knows who you're going to inspire. So like mad props to you, because you create some really great stuff.
Thanks, man. I appreciate that. That's awesome. And all the stuff you guys are saying too is just, again, it's just so inspiring to me. And it just seems to be pretty like a unified message from all the filmmakers that are just doing it. I just did a podcast with Quincy Ledbetter. He's a first-time feature writer and director. He did a thing with like Paramount and BT, and his whole thing is proceed as if, and that's really what you guys did. You're like, iPhone, sure, we're just gonna proceed. Zach Lebowski, who him and Adam made Freaks. And that did pretty well for them. And they did the same thing. They were like, you know what, we got a 5D and we got a cabin. We're just going to proceed as if, and it grew, similar to like what you guys did. You just went for it, and it went where it was going to, but you were going to do it either way. You're making your films and you're doing it again. So I just think that's a really amazing message for young filmmakers. And I definitely commend you for doing that. And, the film is great. So everybody needs to check that out. We'll put links to everything and notes everything about the film, and I can't wait to see the next one.
Oh, thank you.
Thank you, Ryan.
Thanks, man. Yeah, and I can speak. I think I can speak for all three of us. We're all the type of filmmakers that, like, not that we're at any sort of necessarily high up level, but like we're always down to talk to people that are thinking about making their first film and give any form of advice, whether that's email or social media or hopping on a call. It's like we want more people to take the advice of just going to make it, and we're definitely happy to engage in those conversations.
Those are the people that are going to succeed, and that I want to succeed is to have that sort of mentality. The whole we're all climbing a ladder, and then you reach back and pull the next one up. I think that's great.
Yeah, thanks. Thank you.
All right, thanks, guys.
Yeah,
thanks, Ryan.
Thanks, Ryan.
So that's it for today. A huge thank you to the guys for taking the time to chat with us. Of course, jump over to filmriot.com/podcast, find the episode page for this episode, and you'll find more links for all of them, the film and other works that they've done. Of course, you can find me online at twitter.com/Ryan_Conley. And until next time, don't forget to write, shoot, edit, repeat.